29. The Citadel's inner hall matched its exterior in both palette and design. Muted gray walls and a welcome area that was all sharp edges and pristine white. The brutal architecture gave the space a utilitarian chill, as though this were a place of cold logic and rational thought. Not even the blocky furniture offered any semblance of warmth or comfort. Cal rotated a click out of his jaw and nursed the right side edge of his chin. Jord had put on a convincing show, and he almost regretted asking his friend to relive their adolescent rivalry. Jord winked at him as Cal leaned against what he took to be a chamberlain's desk, a long, hard, whitewashed wooden counter beside chairs of matching material with backs too tall for any normal person. He scanned the others as they entered the space. Artie checked and rechecked the contents of a satchel he wore at his hip. Shay ran her fingers across the pommel of her dagger. Jord took in the room around him with meticulous detail, sighing each time the beginnings of an idea fell through. Each of them was trying to hide their nervousness in some way. Ovette and Quentin, however, seemed unfazed, their gazes fixed ahead on the lone corridor that led deeper into the heart of the citadel. Ovette strained herself, as if listening for the slightest change in something. Cal surmised she sensed the gift swirling around, or perhaps Veilwind's chain. The limited sentience Ovette had said the chains possessed might be talking to her, or perhaps listening for her. Either way, if Ovette could sense it, then Cal was certain it could sense her back. Come to think of it, shouldn't he be able to feel something too? Cal reached out with his senses, not entirely sure what he was doing or even what he expected to feel. The whispers in his head, the soft buzzing that had haunted him since Igni, had ceased. Ovette using her gift on him had silenced them, and now here, close to another chain, their absence was like a hole had been bored into his skull. It had become an empty void that his thoughts and feelings had to swim around. He closed his eyes and turned his senses inward. In his mind's eye, he saw himself standing at the edge of a precipice, peering down into its dark depths. The urge to jump in was strong, to allow himself to be swallowed by whatever lurked in the shadows of his fractured mind. He knew one thing for sure. The presence that resided at the bottom of this pit might be silent, but it wasn't gone. "Where is everyone?" Artie's voice pulled Cal back from the edge. He blinked and turned his gaze around to the entrance hall, only now coming to the realization that he and his group were alone.
Well, the plan was for the distraction outside to pull as many people out of the citadel as possible.
Jord answered, edging his way toward the corridor.
Perhaps. For once, luck is on our side.
Keep your guard up, Shay said, moving past Jord and being the first in the group to start making their way out of the entrance hall. We don't know what's waiting. Cal waited behind to bring up the rear. As he took his first step into the long gray-white corridor, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A momentary urge to flee overwhelmed him. He spun on the spot, trying in vain to get a sense of where this feeling had come from. A thump hit him in the back, knocking the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping for his next breath, the echo of a piercing ring fading from his mind.
Cal?
He straightened and spun to face Artie and the rest of the group. His eyes widened at the sight of his surroundings. The emotionless decor of the entrance hall had been replaced by towering shelves that stretched across the back wall of a small office. Each of the shelves cubbyholes packed with books and scrolls. Sturdy metallic desks ran the length of the office in precise rows, each stacked with neat paper piles, all in the same uniform gray-white as the rest of the citadel.
Cal, are you feeling okay?
Artie cocked his eyebrow as he looked at Cal, his expression creasing his features. Cal started to answer, but the thumping sensation returned, this time a gentle pounding behind his eyes. His vision blurred, and the room began to swim around him. He rubbed his hands against his eyes, blinking his vision back into focus. Panic stabbed at his temples. One moment the office, and his friends along with it, had been there, and in the next, it was gone. The world had shifted, leaving him standing alone in the center of a giant pit. His gaze tracked the pit's void black conical walls before tilting back to take in their height. The walls ended at a disk of light, distant and cold. A figure, too obscured by distance and shadow, stood at the edge, staring down. He tried to scream, to force any sound and let the figure know he needed help, but his mouth stayed silent. Straining his throat made no difference. He darted to the nearest wall and slammed his fist against it, hoping to make some kind of echo. None came. Pain blazed through his hand as his fist impacted the wall again, again, again. The figure pulled back from the edge, and Cal sank to the floor. The emptiness of this void pushed down on him as his mind raced for a way out. Climbing, fighting, anything to escape. His hands pawed at his hip, where his blades should have been. Nothing. Panic clamped around him like a vice, choking him for a breath. Then, as unexplained as the space itself, a single high-pitched snap of metal on metal rang through the darkness. Cal pressed his back to the wall and pushed himself to stand. The metallic snap sounded again, and then again, louder this time. He leaned forward, head cocked, eyes straining against the shadows. Without warning, the pit erupted with noise. The snapping crescendoed around him, grinding and banging against the walls, getting louder and louder, closer and closer. A change sprang from the darkness ahead, and Cal threw his arms in front of his face in reflex, just as a voice rang through the darkness. Cal! Cal's senses roared to life. He squeezed his eyes shut against the blinding light of the corridor and clamped his hands over his ears. The arguing voices of his companions coming to him all at once. With effort, he opened his eyes to see Ovette right in front of him, staring at him with a grave look of concern. Are you here? She asked, her eyes flickering between his. Talk to me. Yeah, he replied, shaking his head slightly as if to try and clear the fog. I was in a pit. And then. His words trailed off as he noticed the others behind her. Shay and Artie were locked in an argument with an animated Jord, and Quentin was nowhere to be seen.
We're lost,
George said, his agitation thickening every word.
we've been wandering these halls for hours. Quentin is gone, and we're no closer to that blasted chain room.
Shouting at us isn't going to change that, Shay replied, her one arm held in front of Artie. The artificial lighting that illuminated the halls made it impossible to tell what time of day it was, or even gauge how long the group had been in the Citadel. To Cal, it felt like the group had only just arrived, but Jord had mentioned wandering for hours. His thoughts drifted back to the pit and the chain that had shot out from the darkness. The thumping sensation returned. It reverberated through the walls, emanating from deeper within the Citadel. Cal scanned the identical corridors, unable to discern any real difference from one direction to another. The thumps came again, clearer, like a distant heartbeat pulsing in the dark. He stared into the darkness of the featureless corridor to his left. Something was pulling him toward it, calling out to him. It's this way, he said, his voice monotone as he began walking toward the pulsing, not waiting or checking to see if the others were following him. What?
Where is he going?
How can you be certain? The thump in the air drowned out their voices. Cal wasn't sure how he knew, but his certainty was ironclad. The chain was calling him forward. It wanted him to find it. He followed that call, the pulse in the air intensifying with each step. As he turned a corner, certain the chain was just ahead, Ovette grabbed his wrist and shoved her coin pouch into his hand. Hey, look at me! She grabbed the side of his face with her free hand, forcing his eyes to meet hers. Focus on this when the voices get too loud, okay? Her grim expression left no room for debate. Cal nodded in reply and stepped toward a doorway, feeling the source of the pulse within. Cold, gray white walls and a cavernous ceiling yawned before him. Phalewin's chain passed through the ceiling and floor at an angle. And a raised platform had been crafted to meet one of its enormous links. Runes inscribed into the metal thumped in concert with the call Cal had felt, confirming what he already knew to be true. The chain wanted him in this room. The pit and the lancing chain flashed in his mind, accompanied by the slightest itch. His fingers closed around Ovette's coin pouch. The feeling of the rough material anchored him. The reminder of who it belonged to lightened the weight in his limbs. Cal held his breath as he stared at the chain. And it stared back. He wondered to himself if the chain could feel. He'd come here to sever it, to kill it before it killed him. So shouldn't it be afraid? Feel some kind of anticipation? Resistance? On the contrary, the chain emanated a sense of calm. It fixed its gaze on Ovette and him, dismissing the others as beneath its notice. One by one, the rest of the group filed into the room behind Cal, each of them checking corners and shadows for any sign of ambush or enemy in waiting. Wasting little time, Ovette moved toward the raised platform, her stride confident and sure, cutting through the tension. Cal, are you ready? We do this together. The chain sent out a thick pulse in reply. It knew what they were about to do, but this pulse wasn't a form of defense, nor a plea for mercy. It was a signal. But a signal for whom? Cal, are you with me? Ovette pressed. Cal wrenched his focus back into the present moment. The more he thought of the chain, the more he felt like he was staring into that deep pit again. He stepped beside Ovette and drew the blade shard. Let's do this quickly. Ovette nodded and moved closer to the chain, her arms raised too. A whistle, sharp and deliberate, ripped through the room. Cal spun around, his eyes locking on the form of a grinning Quentin. He had Artie pinned from behind, a dagger glinting across his throat. I wouldn't do that just yet, my dear, he sneered. Chainbreaker, Gyfted, if you would be so kind as to step back. Cal took a step toward him, a murderous snarl curling his lip. But Quentin pulled back on Artie's arm, pressing the edge of the dagger into his throat deep enough to draw a tiny rivulet of blood. Ah, ah, ah. Do as I say and no one gets hurt. Well, no one important anyway. You bastard! Shay yelled. What are you doing? My job, Quentin smirked, not taking his eyes off of Cal or his blade off Artie's throat. 3 inquisitors stepped through the doorway into the room, all with pallid skin and thick, sickly green sludge seeping from their eyes and corners of their mouths. The stench of death rolled off of them in waves, and their armor bulged at weird angles, warped by something festering beneath. Well done, Quentin. A fourth figure followed the inquisitors into the chamber, his gray hair swept back, his armor enhanced not by design, but by the general imperiousness of his demeanor. His gaze locked onto Cal, the Lord Inquisitor. "We meet at last, Callus."